The rain hammered against the cracked pavement of downtown Seattle like bullets from the sky. Most people would call it just another Tuesday evening, but for 22-year-old Madison Brooks, it was the night that would change everything. Clutching her 3-month-old daughter Emma against her chest, she had no idea that in less than an hour, she'd be sitting in the back of a luxury limousine, face to face with one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest. What started as her darkest moment would become the beginning of something extraordinary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Madison pulled her thin jacket tighter on Emma as they huddled under the narrow overhang of an abandoned storefront on Pine Street. The weathered "For Lease" sign above them rattled in the wind, and water dripped steadily through a crack in the concrete, creating a small puddle at their feet. She'd been walking for 3 hours now, ever since the landlord had changed the locks on her studio apartment. "I'm sorry, baby girl," she whispered to Emma, whose tiny fists were pressed against Madison's chest. "Mama's going to figure this out." The eviction notice was still crumpled in her back pocket, along with her last $17 and a phone with a dead battery. 3 months of unpaid rent had finally caught up with her, and despite her desperate pleas to Mr. Kowalski, the building owner, there had been no mercy. The part-time job at the local diner barely covered groceries, let alone the $800 she owed in back rent. Emma began to fuss, her small cries barely audible over the thunderclap that echoed through the empty street. Madison knew what she needed. It had been 4 hours since the last feeding, and the baby's internal clock was as reliable as clockwork. She looked around desperately, searching for somewhere, anywhere, that might offer shelter and privacy. The bus stop across the street had a small awning, but it was already occupied by an elderly man with multiple shopping bags who seemed to be settling in for the night. The 24-hour laundromat 3 blocks back had closed early due to a broken water main. Every coffee shop, every restaurant, every public building she'd passed had been either closed or unwelcoming to a young mother with nowhere else to go. Emma's cries grew more insistent, and Madison felt her heart breaking. She'd been in difficult situations before. Growing up in the foster care system had taught her resilience, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human being safe and fed, when she couldn't even keep a roof over their heads. "Okay, sweet girl, okay," Madison murmured, making a decision that felt both necessary and humiliating. She positioned herself in the deepest corner of the storefront overhang, using her jacket to create as much privacy as possible. The rain was coming down in sheets now, creating a curtain of water just 3 feet from where she sat on the cold concrete. As she began to nurse Emma, Madison's mind raced through the events that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a sophomore at Seattle Community College, studying business administration and working toward a degree that she hoped would give her and Emma a better life. The pregnancy had been unexpected, a result of a relationship with a classmate named Tyler, who'd disappeared the moment she'd told him the news. She'd tried to make it work, balancing classes with a growing belly and eventually a newborn, but the child care costs alone had eaten through her savings. When Emma was born premature and spent 2 weeks in the NICU, the medical bills had started piling up despite her basic insurance coverage. The final blow had come when she'd missed too many shifts at the diner due to Emma's frequent doctor appointments, and her hours had been cut in half. The rain seemed to be getting heavier, and Madison noticed that water was starting to pool under the overhang. She shifted position, trying to keep Emma dry, but her own clothes were already soaked through. The autumn chill was seeping into her bones, and she wondered how long they could stay here before hypothermia became a real concern. Emma had fallen asleep while nursing, her tiny face peaceful despite their dire circumstances. Madison looked down at her daughter, all 7 pounds and 3 ounces of her, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. This little girl deserved So much more than a mother who couldn't even provide basic shelter. She deserved warm blankets and a safe crib, nutritious food and educational toys, college savings and birthday parties with friends. A car splashed through a massive puddle nearby, sending a spray of dirty water toward their hiding spot. Madison instinctively curled around Emma, shielding her from the splash, but the movement caused her to slip slightly on the wet concrete. She caught herself before falling, but the jarring motion woke Emma, who immediately began crying again. Baby, it's okay," Madison whispered, but her voice was shaking now, and she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the overwhelming fear that was threatening to consume her. She had no plan beyond this moment. No family to call, no friends with spare couches, no savings account to dip into. The homeless shelter downtown had a 6-month waiting list, and the women's shelter required advance registration that she hadn't had time to complete before the eviction. She thought about her caseworker from the state, Mrs. Patterson, who'd always been kind but had made it clear that Madison was aging out of the system's support structure. At 22, she was considered an adult fully capable of managing her own life, regardless of the circumstances that had brought her to this point. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been placed in foster care at age 8 because her own mother had been deemed unfit, and now she was sitting on a sidewalk in the rain, wondering if she was following in those same footsteps. Emma's cries were getting more desperate, and Madison realized that the baby was probably picking up on her stress. She forced herself to take deep breaths, trying to project calm even as her mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Social services, foster care, losing Emma forever. The thought made her feel physically sick. A flash of lightning illuminated the street, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Madison counted 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, but the light and sound had been simultaneous, meaning the storm was directly overhead. She pulled Emma closer, creating a cocoon with her body and jacket, but she could feel the baby's clothes growing damp despite her efforts. It was then that she noticed the headlights cutting through the rain like twin beacons. Most cars had been speeding past all evening, their drivers eager to get home to warm houses and dry clothes. But these headlights were moving slowly, deliberately, as if the driver was looking for something. Or someone. The vehicle, it looked like a limousine from what she could see through the rain, pulled up to the curb directly in front of where they were huddled. Madison's first instinct was fear. Strange men in expensive cars stopping for vulnerable women rarely led to good outcomes, and she'd heard enough horror stories to make her press herself further back into the shadows. But then the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out into the rain. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, wearing what looked like an expensive suit that was getting ruined by the downpour. Instead of approaching them directly, he stood by his car for a moment, looking in their direction with what appeared to be genuine concern rather than predatory interest. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Are you okay over there? Do you need help?" Madison hesitated. Every survival instinct she'd developed growing up in the system told her to stay hidden, to wait for him to leave, to never trust strangers who seemed too good to be true. But Emma was shivering now, and Madison could feel her own body temperature dropping. The reality was that they needed help, and this might be their only chance. "We're fine," she called back, the lie obvious even to her own ears. Emma chose that moment to let out a particularly loud cry, as if contradicting her mother's words. The man took a step closer, but stopped when he seemed to sense Madison's fear. "My name is Jonathan Reed," he said, raising his voice to be heard. "Over the storm. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight?" Madison studied him through the rain. He looked genuinely concerned, and something about his posture, hands visible, maintaining distance, speaking calmly, made her think that maybe, just maybe, he was one of the good ones. But trusting strangers had never been easy for her, and with Emma to protect, the stakes were higher than ever. "I'm waiting for someone," she lied again, but her voice cracked. Jonathan seemed to understand that she was scared. He pulled out his phone and held it up so she could see the screen. "I'm going to call someone to help you," he said. "A social worker or a shelter coordinator. You and your baby shouldn't be out here in this weather." "No," Madison said quickly, panic rising in her voice. "Please don't call anyone. We're fine, I promise. My ride is coming." But even as she said the words, she knew how implausible they sounded. What kind of ride would leave a mother and baby sitting on a storefront step in a thunderstorm? And Jonathan seemed to realize this too, because his expression grew more concerned rather than reassured. "Listen," he said, taking another careful step forward. "I don't know your situation, and I'm not going to judge you for it. But that baby needs to get somewhere warm and dry, and so do you. Let me help, please." Emma's crying was becoming more distressed, and Madison could feel her daughter's small body trembling against her chest. The rain was coming down harder now, and their makeshift shelter was no longer providing adequate protection. Madison found herself at a crossroads. Trust a stranger or watch her daughter suffer through what could be a dangerous night on the streets. She looked at Jonathan again. Really looked at him this time. His hair was plastered to his head from the rain, and his expensive suit was completely soaked. He could have simply driven past like everyone else, could have called the authorities from the comfort of his car, could have done any number of things that would have been easier than standing in a thunderstorm trying to convince a scared young mother to accept help. "I don't have anywhere to go," she finally admitted, the words torn from her throat like a confession. "We got evicted today, and I don't have any money for a hotel or anything else." Jonathan's expression softened with understanding rather than pity. "Okay," he said simply. "Let's start with getting you both somewhere warm and dry. We can figure out the rest from there." Madison hesitated for another moment, weighing her limited options. Stay here and risk Emma's health and safety, or trust this stranger who seemed genuinely interested in helping them. When she looked down at her daughter's small, shivering form, the choice became clear. "Okay," she whispered, barely audible over the rain. Jonathan immediately moved into action, jogging back to the limousine and returning with a large umbrella and what looked like a blanket. "Can you walk to the car?" he asked, holding the umbrella over them. Madison nodded, struggling to her feet while keeping Emma secure against her chest. Her legs were stiff from sitting on the cold concrete, and she stumbled slightly as they made their way to the vehicle. Jonathan stayed close but didn't try to touch her or the baby, seeming to understand that she needed to maintain some sense of control over the situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The interior of the limousine was like stepping into a different world. Warm air enveloped them immediately, and Madison sank into the plush leather seat with a sigh of relief that she couldn't suppress. Emma stopped crying almost instantly, as if she too could sense that they were finally safe from the storm. "Better?" Jonathan asked, settling into the seat across from them. Up close, Madison could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably late 30s, with kind eyes and a face that suggested he smiled often, though he looked serious now. "Much better," Madison admitted, looking around at the luxurious interior. "Thank you. I know this is unusual." "Not unusual at all," Jonathan said, though Madison suspected he was being kind. "People need help sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that." As the limousine pulled away from the curb, Madison watched the storefront where they'd been huddled disappear into the rain-soaked darkness behind them. She had no idea where they were going or what would happen next, but for the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things might work out after all. The limousine glided through the Seattle streets with a smoothness that Madison had never experienced before. She found herself mesmerized by the way the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, creating streaks of gold and red against the rain-slicked glass. Emma had settled into a peaceful sleep against her chest, finally warm and dry for the first time in hours. "Where are we going?" Madison asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Jonathan was typing something on his phone, but looked up immediately when she spoke. "There's a hotel downtown that I use for business guests, the Hampton Suites. They'll have a room available tonight, and it's completely safe. Clean, warm, room service if you need it." Madison felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "I can't afford a hotel room. I told you, I only have $17. "You don't need to worry about that," Jonathan said gently. "I'll take care of it." "I'm not a charity case," Madison said, the words coming out sharper than she'd intended. Growing up in foster care had taught her to be wary of people who offered help without expecting something in return. There was always a catch, always a price to pay later. Jonathan seemed to understand her defensiveness. "I didn't say you were. But everyone needs help sometimes, and right now, you need a safe place to spend the night with your daughter. Let me do this one thing, and tomorrow we can figure out a plan that works for everyone." Madison studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives, but all she saw was genuine concern. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting to the window. "About 15 years ago, I was in a similar situation. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Someone helped me when I had nowhere else to turn, and it changed the entire trajectory of my life. Maybe this is my chance to pay that forward." The limousine turned onto a well-lit street lined with upscale shops and restaurants. Madison could see people hurrying along the sidewalks under colorful umbrellas, ducking into warm establishments filled with light and laughter. It felt like watching a movie about someone else's life, a life where people had money for dinner out and dry clothes to change into. "What kind of work do you do?" Madison asked, curious about the man who could afford to put strangers up in hotels without thinking twice about the cost. "I own a company called Pacific Northwest Solutions. We provide staffing and consulting services for businesses throughout the region. Started it in my garage 12 years ago with a $5,000 loan and a lot of determination." Madison was impressed despite herself. "That's incredible. You built all this from nothing?" Jonathan smiled, and she could see why he'd been successful. There was something infectious about his enthusiasm when he talked about his work. "Not from nothing. I had help along the way, mentors who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's actually part of why I started the company the way I did." "What do you mean?" "Most staffing agencies focus on placing people who already have extensive experience and perfect resumes. We specialize in finding potential in people who might not look perfect on paper, but have the drive and intelligence to succeed. Single mothers returning to work, people who've been unemployed for extended periods, individuals aging out of foster care systems." Madison felt her heart skip a beat at the last example. "You help people from foster care? It's one of our core missions. I aged out of the system myself at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a lot of anger at the world. I know how hard it is to break the cycle when society has already written you off." The limousine pulled up in front of an elegant hotel with a gleaming glass facade. Madison could see a doorman in a crisp uniform waiting under a large awning, ready to escort guests through the rain. It was the kind of place she'd walked past hundreds of times, but never imagined herself entering. "I can't let you pay for this," she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. Emma stirred in her arms, making small contented sounds that indicated she was finally comfortable and secure. "Here's what I'm thinking," Jonathan said, leaning forward slightly. "You spend tonight getting some rest, taking a hot shower, maybe ordering some room service. Tomorrow morning, you come to my office and we talk about your situation. Not as a charity case, but as someone who might benefit from our services. If there's a good fit, maybe we can find you a job that pays enough to get you back on your feet. If not, at least you'll have had one night to figure out your next move without worrying about staying warm and dry. Madison felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. What if I'm not qualified for anything? I dropped out of college. I don't have any real work experience besides waitressing. And I have a baby who needs constant care. Let me worry about that, Jonathan said. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I've learned to see potential where others might not. Besides, some of our best employees are working mothers. They tend to be incredibly organized, efficient, and motivated. The doorman had noticed their arrival and was walking toward the limousine with an umbrella. Madison made a quick decision. That surprised even her. Okay, one night. But I want to pay you back somehow, even if it takes me years. Jonathan's smile was warm and genuine. Deal, but first, let's get you both settled. The next few minutes passed in a blur of luxury that Madison had never experienced. The doorman treated her with the same respect he would show any other guest, despite her wet clothes and obvious exhaustion. The lobby was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, with soft music playing from hidden speakers and fresh flowers arranged in massive vases. Jonathan spoke quietly with the desk clerk while Madison stood nearby, trying not to feel out of place. Emma had woken up and was looking around with wide eyes, seeming as amazed by their surroundings as her mother was. All set, Jonathan said, returning with a key card. Room 847. It's a suite with a separate sitting area, and there's a crib available if you'd like one brought up. A crib? Madison repeated, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. The hotel caters to business travelers with families. They have everything you might need: baby supplies, extra towels, even a selection of different formula types if you need to supplement. They rode the elevator in comfortable silence, and Madison found herself studying Jonathan's reflection in the polished brass doors. He didn't seem like someone who was putting on an act or trying to impress her. He just seemed like a genuinely kind person who happened to have the resources to help. The suite was more beautiful than any place Madison had ever stayed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Seattle skyline, and the furniture was elegant but comfortable. There was a kitchenette stocked with complimentary snacks and beverages, and the bathroom was larger than the studio apartment she'd been evicted from that morning. The room service menu is on the desk, Jonathan said, setting down a small bag that Madison hadn't noticed him carrying. I took the liberty of having the hotel shop put together some basic necessities, toiletries, a change of clothes for both you and the baby, some diapers and formula just in case. Madison opened the bag and found everything she could possibly need, all in the right sizes. How did you know what sizes to get? I have a sister with 3 kids. You develop an eye for these things. He pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on the coffee table. My direct number is on there. If you need anything tonight, anything at all, don't hesitate to call. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10. The address is on the card. After Jonathan left, Madison stood in the middle of the luxurious suite, hardly able to believe that this was real. She set Emma down on the king-sized bed, surrounding her with pillows for safety, and then walked to the window to look out at the city below. Just 12 hours ago, she'd been crying in her empty apartment while a locksmith changed the deadbolt. 6 hours ago, she'd been trudging through the rain with no destination in mind. 2 hours ago, she'd been huddled under a storefront overhang, wondering if she was going to lose Emma to the system that had failed her so many years before. Now she was standing in a hotel suite that probably cost more per night than she'd made in a month at the diner, with a potential job interview scheduled for the morning and a man who seemed genuinely interested in helping her succeed. Emma made a small sound from the bed, and Madison turned to find her daughter looking around the room with curious eyes. What do you think, baby girl? Pretty fancy, huh? Madison picked up the room service menu and nearly choked when she saw the prices. A simple pasta dish cost $40, more than she'd spent on groceries in a week. But Jonathan had said not to worry about money tonight, and her stomach was reminding her that she hadn't eaten since that morning. She ordered a modest meal and then ran a bath in the enormous marble tub, using the expensive bath salts provided by the hotel. It felt decadent and necessary at the same time. As she soaked in the hot water, she allowed herself to imagine what tomorrow might bring. Jonathan had mentioned that his company specialized in helping people who didn't look perfect on paper. Madison definitely fit that description. She'd never had the chance to finish college, had no professional references to speak of, and came with the complication of needing childcare arrangements. But she was smart, determined, and desperate enough to work harder than anyone else if given the opportunity. The food arrived while she was getting dressed in the comfortable pajamas Jonathan had included in the care package. The delivery person set up her meal on the small dining table by the window, complete with cloth napkins and real silverware. Madison had expected to feel awkward eating alone in such elegant surroundings, but instead she found it peaceful. As she ate, she thought about her conversation with Jonathan in the limousine. He'd mentioned being in foster care himself, which explained why he'd seemed to understand her wariness and defensiveness. Most people who'd never been in the system didn't realize how it trained you to expect disappointment, to always be waiting for the other shoe to drop. But there had been something different about Jonathan's offer. He wasn't promising to solve all her problems or making guarantees he couldn't keep. He was simply offering her a chance to prove herself, which was all she'd ever really wanted. Emma had fallen asleep on the bed, looking tiny and peaceful against the white hotel linens. Madison carefully moved her to the crib that had been delivered. While she was bathing, marveling at how different her daughter looked when she wasn't stressed or uncomfortable. Emma deserved to sleep in a real crib every night, deserved to have a mother who could provide stability and security. Madison spent the rest of the evening researching Pacific Northwest solutions on her phone, which she'd been able to charge using the hotel's complimentary charging station. The company's website was professional and impressive, with testimonials from both clients and employees that painted Jonathan as a fair and innovative leader. What struck her most were the employee success stories featured on the site. There was Maria, a single mother who'd started as a receptionist and worked her way up to regional manager. James, a military veteran who'd struggled with PTSD and found purpose in the company's veteran placement program. Sarah, who'd aged out of foster care and was now pursuing her MBA with tuition assistance from the company. These weren't just feel-good stories, designed to make the company look charitable. They were detailed accounts of real people who'd been given opportunities to build meaningful careers. Madison found herself wondering if she could be one of those success stories someday. She also researched Jonathan himself and found articles about him in local business publications. He'd been named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Seattle Business Journal 2 years running, and Pacific Northwest Solutions had been recognized as one of the best places to work in Washington state. Everything she found confirmed what her instincts had told her. He was legitimate, successful, and genuinely committed to helping people. As she prepared for bed, Madison realized that for the first time in months, she felt hopeful about the future. Not naively optimistic, but genuinely hopeful that tomorrow might bring real possibilities, rather than just another day of survival. She checked on Emma one more time before settling into the incredibly comfortable bed. Through the window she could see the lights of the city twinkling like stars, and the rain had finally stopped. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were safe, warm, and fed. Madison closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream about what her life might look like if Jonathan's offer turned out to be as genuine as it seemed. A steady job, with benefits, an apartment she could afford, maybe even the chance to finish her degree someday. For Emma, It could mean daycare with other children, birthday parties, dance lessons, college savings. It felt dangerous to hope for so much. But as she drifted off to sleep in the most comfortable bed she'd ever experienced, Madison decided that maybe, just maybe, it was time to start believing that good things could happen to people like her. Madison woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel suite, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For a split second, she panicked, thinking she'd overslept for a shift at the diner before remembering that she no longer had that job, or any job for that matter. The events of the previous evening came flooding back, and she turned quickly to check on Emma, who was still sleeping peacefully in the hotel crib. The digital clock on the nightstand read 7:23 a.m. Her interview with Jonathan wasn't until 10, which gave her plenty of time to prepare. She'd spent most of the night mentally rehearsing what she might say, trying to anticipate the kinds of questions he'd ask and formulate answers that would demonstrate her potential despite her limited experience. After feeding Emma and getting them both dressed in the clothes Jonathan had provided, Madison called the front desk to inquire about childcare options. The concierge informed her that the hotel offered a licensed babysitting service for guests, with caregivers who were bonded, insured, and experienced with infants. The cost was steep, $40 an hour, but Madison realized that this might be her only chance to make a good impression at the interview. She made the appointment for 9:30, which would give her time to get to Jonathan's office and still have an hour for the meeting. As she waited for the babysitter to arrive, Madison stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to transform herself from a desperate young mother into someone who looked professionally competent. The outfit Jonathan had selected was perfect. A navy blue blazer with matching slacks that fit her surprisingly well, and a crisp white blouse that made her look older and more polished than her 22 years. She'd found makeup samples in the hotel's complimentary toiletry basket, and had managed to cover the dark circles under her eyes and add some color to her pale cheeks. The babysitter, a middle-aged woman named Helen Carter, arrived precisely on time. She had 20 years of childcare experience and immediately put Madison at ease with her warm demeanor and obvious competence with Emma. Still, leaving her daughter with a stranger felt like ripping off a bandage, even though Madison knew it was necessary. The Pacific Northwest Solutions office was located in a sleek downtown building that Madison had passed countless times but never entered. The lobby was all glass and steel, with abstract art on the walls and the kind of modern furniture that looked uncomfortable but probably cost more than most people's cars. Madison announced herself to the receptionist, a friendly woman in her 30s who seemed genuinely pleased to meet her. "Mr. Reed is running a few minutes behind schedule," the receptionist explained. "He's finishing up a call with a client in Portland. Can I get you some coffee or water while you wait?" Madison accepted a cup of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. She settled into one of the lobby chairs and tried to calm her nerves by observing the steady stream of people coming and going. The employees she saw looked diverse in age, background, and professional dress, which reinforced what Jonathan had told her about the company's inclusive hiring practices. At exactly 10:15, Jonathan appeared in the lobby, looking every bit the successful businessman in his charcoal gray suit and confident stride. But his smile was warm and genuine when he saw Madison, and she felt some of her anxiety ease. "Madison, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. The call ran longer than expected." He gestured toward the elevator bank. "Shall we head up to my office?" Jonathan's office occupied a corner of the building's 20th floor, with windows offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. The space was elegant but comfortable, with family photos on the desk and bookshelves lined with business texts and what appeared to be personal favorites. Madison noticed several books about foster care reform and youth advocacy, which gave her additional insight into Jonathan's character. "Please have a seat," Jonathan said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. How was your night at the hotel? I hope you and Emma were able to get some rest. It was wonderful, Madison said honestly. More comfortable than anywhere we've stayed in months. Thank you again for your generosity. I'm glad to hear it. Now let's talk about you. I know this isn't a traditional interview situation, but I'd like to learn more about your background, your goals, and what kind of work environment would be the best fit for you. Madison had prepared for this moment, but sitting across from Jonathan in his impressive office, she felt the weight of how much this opportunity could mean for her and Emma's future. I suppose I should start by being completely honest about my situation. I know it doesn't make me look like an ideal candidate. Honesty is always the best policy, Jonathan said, leaning back in his chair. Tell me your story. Madison took a deep breath and began. She told him about growing up in foster care, never having a stable family situation to provide guidance or support. She explained how she'd aged out of the system at 18 with basic life skills, but no real understanding of how to navigate the adult world. She described her attempts at college, how the unexpected pregnancy had derailed those plans, and how she'd been struggling to balance single motherhood with work and financial stability. The hardest part, she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, is that I know I'm capable of more than what my resume shows. I've always been good with numbers, good at organizing systems and solving problems. In foster care, you learn to be resourceful and adaptable because your situation is always changing. But none of that shows up on job applications. Jonathan listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes on a legal pad. When Madison finished, he was quiet for a moment, seeming to process everything she'd shared. You mentioned being good with numbers and organizing systems, he said finally. Tell me more about that. Madison felt a spark of confidence. In my last foster home, I helped my foster mother manage the household finances for 6 kids. I created a budgeting system that tracked expenses, identified areas where we could save money, and even helped her apply for some assistance programs she didn't know existed. At the diner, I was always the one they called when the register didn't balance or when they needed someone to reorganize the inventory system. Interesting, Jonathan said, making another note. What about technology? Are you comfortable with computers, software programs, that kind of thing? I'm self-taught mostly, but yes. I used Excel to create the budgeting system I mentioned, and I've picked up different software programs pretty quickly when I needed to. I actually helped my foster mother set up an online system for tracking the kids' school schedules and medical appointments. Jonathan smiled, and Madison could see that she was making a good impression. What I'm hearing is someone who identifies problems and creates solutions, who's willing to learn new skills when necessary, and who can work effectively under pressure. Those are exactly the qualities we look for in our employees. Really? Madison couldn't hide her surprise. Absolutely. Let me tell you about a position we have open that might be perfect for you. It's in our client services department, working with small businesses to assess their staffing needs and develop solutions. It requires strong analytical skills, attention to detail, and the ability to build relationships with clients who are often facing their own challenges. Madison felt her heart rate increase. That sounds incredible, but I have to ask about childcare. Emma is only 3 months old, and I don't have family who can help with babysitting. That's actually one of the reasons I think you'd be perfect for this role, Jonathan said. About 60% of the work can be done remotely. Client calls, data analysis, report writing. You'd need to be in the office for team meetings and some client visits, but we're very flexible about schedules for working parents. We also have an on-site childcare facility that provides services at cost for employees. Madison felt tears welling up in her eyes, but these were tears of hope rather than desperation. What kind of salary are we talking about? I need to know if I can actually support Emma and myself. Jonathan named a figure that was more than double what Madison had been making at the diner. with full benefits including health insurance, dental coverage, and a retirement savings plan with company matching. There's also a clothing allowance for client-facing roles, and after 6 months, you'd be eligible for our educational assistance program if you wanted to finish your degree. The offer was so far beyond what Madison had dared to hope for that she felt dizzy. I don't understand why you're willing to take such a chance on someone with no experience in this field. Because experience can be taught, but character can't. You've demonstrated resilience, resourcefulness, and determination under circumstances that would have broken a lot of people. You're also motivated to succeed not just for yourself, but for your daughter. In my experience, those are the employees who become our biggest success stories. Jonathan pulled out a folder from his desk drawer and handed it to Madison. These are some testimonials from current employees who came to us in similar situations. I think you'll find their stories encouraging. Madison opened the folder and began reading. There was Lisa Hoffman, who'd been a teenage mother living in her car when she started as a part-time data entry clerk. She was now a senior account manager, earning a 6-figure salary. Michael Chun had been homeless after aging out of foster care and struggling with addiction. He'd celebrated 5 years of sobriety the previous month and had just been promoted to department supervisor. These people, Madison said, looking up. From the testimonials, they all started from nothing and built real careers here? They all had something in common with you, Jonathan said. They were willing to work hard, learn quickly, and not give up when things got challenging. The difference is that we gave them the opportunity to prove themselves instead of dismissing them because of their circumstances. Madison felt a surge of determination unlike anything she'd experienced before. When could I start? Jonathan smiled broadly. How about Monday? That gives you the weekend to find an apartment and get settled. I can advance your first paycheck if you need help with deposits and moving expenses. You'd do that? It's an investment in your success, which is an investment in our company's success. We want you to focus on learning the job, not worrying about where you're going to sleep. They spent the next hour going over practical details. Paperwork, training schedules, the employee handbook. Jonathan introduced her to Rebecca Walsh, the Director of Client Services, who would be her immediate supervisor. Rebecca was a sharp, professional woman in her 40s who had an immediately friendly demeanor and seemed genuinely excited about having Madison join the team. We'll start you with some of our smaller accounts, Rebecca explained. Clients who need basic staffing assessments and solutions. As you get comfortable with our processes, we'll gradually increase the complexity of your assignments. Don't worry about making mistakes initially. Everyone has a learning curve, and we'd rather you ask questions than guess. Madison left the Pacific Northwest Solutions office with a signed employment contract, a company laptop, and a stack of training materials to review over the weekend. She also had Rebecca's business card and a promise that someone would be available by phone if she had questions while getting up to speed. The walk back to the hotel felt surreal. Yesterday morning, she'd been homeless and desperate. Now she had a job that paid enough to support herself and Emma, with benefits and opportunities for advancement. It felt too good to be true, but the contract in her purse was real enough. When she arrived back at the hotel, Helen was reading to Emma from a children's book, and both of them looked content and comfortable. Madison felt a pang of guilt for leaving her daughter with a stranger, but she also felt proud that she'd taken the steps necessary to secure their future. How did it go? Helen asked, obviously curious about the outcome. I got the job, Madison said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Congratulations. That's wonderful news. After Helen left, Madison called the hotel concierge to ask about apartments in neighborhoods that would be convenient to both her new office and the on-site childcare facility. The concierge provided her with several options and even offered to schedule viewings for the following day. As evening approached, Madison ordered room service again, this time without guilt, since she now had a way to pay Jonathan back for his kindness. She spread the training materials out on the hotel room's desk and began reading about Pacific Northwest Solutions client base, service offerings, and company culture. The more she learned, the more impressed she became with Jonathan's vision for the company. It wasn't just about making money, though the business was clearly profitable. It was about creating opportunities for people who might not otherwise get them, and building a workforce that reflected the diversity and resilience of the broader community. Emma seemed to sense her mother's improved mood and was more alert and playful than she'd been in weeks. Madison found herself talking to her daughter about their future with an optimism that felt foreign but wonderful. "We're going to have our own apartment, baby girl," she said, holding Emma up so they were face to face. "And Mama's going to have a real job where she can help other people while taking care of us. You're going to go to a nice daycare with other babies to play with. And someday, when you're older, maybe Mama can finish college and show you that it's never too late to reach for your dreams." As Madison prepared for bed, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than 24 hours. She thought about the girl who'd been sitting under that storefront overhang, convinced that she was destined to repeat the failures of her own mother. That girl had been ready to give up, to accept that some people were just meant to struggle. But Jonathan had seen something different in her, something she was only now beginning to see in herself. He'd looked past her circumstances and recognized her potential. More importantly, he'd been willing to invest in that potential with a real opportunity rather than empty encouragement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: finding an apartment, preparing for her first day of work, arranging childcare. But tonight, for the first time since Emma was born, Madison fell asleep believing that she and her daughter were going to be okay. More than okay, they were going to thrive. Saturday morning brought a level of activity that Madison hadn't experienced in months. Armed with a list of potential apartments from the hotel concierge and Jonathan's advance on her first paycheck, she set out to find a home for herself and Emma. The apartment search felt like an adventure rather than a desperate scramble. And Madison marveled at how different the world looked when you had options. The first apartment on her list was in Capitol Hill, a vibrant neighborhood known for its coffee shops, bookstores, and young professional crowd. The one-bedroom unit was on the third floor of a converted Victorian house with hardwood floors, large windows, and enough space for a crib in the bedroom corner. The landlord, Mrs. Chun, was a retired teacher who seemed charmed by Emma and impressed by Madison's new employment situation. "Pacific Northwest Solutions has an excellent reputation," Mrs. Chen said as they walked through the sunny living room. "Mr. Reed has placed several tenants for me over the years, all reliable people who take care of their homes." Madison was surprised to learn that Jonathan's company had a relationship with local landlords specifically to help their employees find housing. It was another example of how thoroughly he'd thought through the challenges facing people in her situation. The second apartment was in Fremont, closer to the office but in a more family-oriented neighborhood with parks and playgrounds nearby. This one was slightly larger, with a separate nursery that could accommodate Emma's growth over the next few years. The building had a community garden where tenants could grow vegetables and flowers, and the landlord mentioned that several other young families lived in the complex. By noon, Madison had seen 4 apartments and felt confident about her top 2 choices. She called Rebecca Walsh, who'd given her a personal cell phone number for weekend questions, to ask about the commute from each neighborhood. Either location would work well, Rebecca assured her. "Fremont might be better long-term if you're thinking about Emma's school years, but Capitol Hill has more energy and cultural activities. It really depends on what kind of lifestyle appeals to you." Madison had never been asked to consider what kind of lifestyle appealed to her. For most of her adult life, she'd simply tried to survive each day. The idea that she could choose where to live based on preferences rather than pure affordability felt revolutionary. She ultimately chose the Fremont apartment, drawn by the community, garden, and the proximity to Green Lake, where she could take Emma for walks in the stroller that was gathering dust in storage. The landlord, David Martinez, was a contractor who'd renovated the building himself and took obvious pride in maintaining quality housing for working families. "The lease starts tomorrow if you want it," David said after checking her employment verification and references. "First month, last month, and security deposit. I can have the utilities turned on by Monday morning." Madison signed the lease with hands that trembled slightly from excitement rather than fear. She had an address again, a place to call home that she'd chosen because she wanted to live there, not because it was the only option she could afford. Afternoon was spent furniture shopping, another experience that felt surreal after months of having nothing but second-hand necessities. Jonathan's advance was generous enough to cover essential furniture, and Madison found herself in the peculiar position of having to restrain her spending rather than stretch every dollar dot at a family-owned furniture store in Georgetown. She selected a comfortable sofa, a dining table with 2 chairs, and a sturdy dresser for the bedroom. The salesperson, an elderly man named Frank Kowalski, threw in free delivery when he learned that Madison was a new mother starting a career in social services. "My daughter works for a nonprofit downtown," Frank explained as he wrote up the sale. "I know how hard you young people work to make a difference. This is my way of saying welcome to the neighborhood." Madison didn't correct his assumption about her working in social services. In a way, it wasn't entirely wrong, helping businesses find the right employees and helping job seekers find opportunities. It'd feel like a form of social service that Emma spent the afternoon contentedly observing the world from her carrier, seeming to enjoy the constant change of scenery and the attention she received from store clerks and other customers. Madison found herself relaxing into the role of competent young professional rather than desperate single mother, and she noticed how differently people treated her. When she projected confidence instead of desperation, Sunday morning brought the actual move, which consisted mainly of retrieving the few belongings Madison had managed to put in storage before the eviction. Her possessions fit easily into the back of David Martinez's pickup truck, a crib that had been a gift from her last foster mother, a box of Emma's clothes and toys, some kitchen items, and a small collection of books and photos that represented the sum total of her personal history. The new apartment felt enormous compared to the cramped studio she'd been evicted from. Madison spent the day arranging furniture, setting up Emma's crib by the bedroom window where she could see the trees in the courtyard, and organizing her small wardrobe in the spacious closet. Rebecca had sent her several training modules to complete over the weekend, basic courses on customer service, data analysis, and the company's proprietary software systems. Madison found the material engaging and challenging in a way that reminded her why she'd enjoyed her college courses. She'd forgotten how satisfying it could be to learn new information and master new skills. As evening approached, Madison sat on her new sofa with Emma on her lap, looking around at their first real home together. The apartment still felt sparse. She'd need to add curtains, decorative touches, and all the small items that turned a space into a home, but it was theirs. More importantly, it was the beginning of something rather than just a place to hide from the world. Her phone rang, and Madison was surprised to see Jonathan's name on the caller ID. "I hope I'm not disturbing your moving day," he said when she answered. "I wanted to check in and see how everything went with the apartment search." "It went perfectly," Madison said, unable to keep the happiness out of her voice. "I found a great place in Fremont, signed the lease yesterday, and I'm sitting in my living room right now. It feels incredible. I'm so glad to hear that. Moving can be stressful under the best circumstances. How are you feeling about starting work tomorrow?" Madison realized she'd been so focused on the practical aspects of getting settled that she hadn't allowed herself to feel nervous about her first day. Now with Jonathan's question, she felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. "Nervous but ready," she admitted. "I've been working through the training modules you gave me, and I think I understand the basics of what you'll expect from me. Rebecca tells me you've been asking excellent questions and that your assessments of the practice scenarios have been very insightful. She's looking forward to working with you." After they hung up, Madison spent some time mentally preparing for the next day. She'd laid out her clothes, another outfit from the professional wardrobe Jonathan had provided, along with the new shoes she'd bought to complete the look. Her laptop was charged and loaded with the software she'd need, and she'd printed copies of all the training materials to reference during her first week. Emma seemed to sense that something important was happening. She was more alert than usual, tracking Madison's movements around the apartment with bright, curious eyes. Madison found herself talking to her daughter more than usual, narrating her preparations and sharing her hopes for their future. "Tomorrow, Mama starts her new job," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor while Emma lay on a blanket nearby. "You're going to the company daycare, where there will be other babies to meet and nice ladies to take care of you while I'm working. And when I come to pick you up, I'll tell you all about what I learned and the people I helped." The company daycare had been one of the most impressive aspects of her new job. During her interview, Rebecca had given her a tour of the facility, which occupied an entire floor of the Pacific Northwest Solutions building. The staff were all licensed early childhood educators. The equipment was state-of-the-art, and the curriculum was designed to support child development from infancy through school age. Most remarkably, the cost was subsidized by the company so that even entry-level employees could afford quality childcare. Madison had calculated that she'd be paying less for Emma's care at the company facility than she would have paid for basic babysitting services elsewhere. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that Madison had learned to appreciate rather than endure. She dressed carefully, fed Emma, and packed everything they'd need for their first day in their new routine. The commute to downtown was easier than she'd expected, and she arrived at the Pacific Northwest Solutions building 15 minutes early. The company daycare was on the 4th floor, and Madison felt a familiar pang of separation anxiety as she prepared to leave Emma with strangers. But the lead caregiver, a warm woman named Patricia Torres, immediately put her at ease with her obvious competence and genuine affection for children. "Emma will do great," Patricia assured her as she settled the baby into a crib in the infant room. "We'll call you if she needs anything, but most babies adjust to our routine very quickly." The other parents rave about how much their children enjoy spending time here. Rebecca was waiting for Madison in the main lobby, and they rode the elevator to the client services department on the 10th floor together. Madison's workspace was a modern cubicle with a view of Elliott Bay, equipped with a desktop computer, dual monitors, and a comfortable ergonomic chair. "We'll start with something straightforward," Rebecca explained, handing Madison a client file. "Harrison Manufacturing is a small company that makes custom metal components for the aerospace industry. They've been growing rapidly and need help assessing their current staffing levels and planning for future expansion." Madison opened the file and began reading about Harrison Manufacturing's history, current employee count, production goals, and growth projections. The information was presented in a clear, organized format that made it easy to identify key issues and potential solutions. "Your job is to analyze their data, identify gaps in their current staffing structure, and recommend positions they should consider adding," Rebecca continued. "You'll also research salary ranges for those positions in the Seattle market and provide cost projections for their consideration." The work was exactly the kind of analytical challenge that Madison had always enjoyed. She spent the morning diving into Harrison Manufacturing's numbers, creating spreadsheets to track their production capacity against their workforce, and researching industry standards for similar companies. At lunch, Rebecca introduced her to the rest of the client services team, 6 other analysts with varying levels of experience and expertise. Madison was struck by the diversity of backgrounds represented in the group. There was Kevin Park, a former military logistics specialist who transitioned to corporate staffing analysis. Sarah Williams had started as a receptionist and worked her way up to senior analyst over 8 years. Marcus Johnson had a master's degree in business administration but had struggled to find work after a period of unemployment following a layoff. "The great thing about working here," Sarah explained during their lunch conversation, "is that Jonathan and Rebecca really believe in promoting from within. If you work hard and show initiative, there are opportunities to advance and take on more responsibility." Madison spent the afternoon refining her analysis of Harrison Manufacturing and preparing her preliminary recommendations. She identified 3 key areas where additional staffing could improve efficiency and support the company's growth plans: a quality control supervisor, a customer service coordinator, and a part-time bookkeeper to handle their increasing administrative needs. The salary research proved more complex than she'd expected, requiring her to consider not just base wages but also benefits, training costs, and the long-term return on investment for each position. Madison found herself drawing on her experience managing household finances in foster care, translating those same principles of careful resource allocation to a business context. At 4 o'clock, Rebecca stopped by Madison's cubicle to review her progress. Madison was nervous about presenting her work to someone with years of experience in the field, but Rebecca's response exceeded her expectations. "This is excellent work," Rebecca said, scanning through Madison's analysis. "Your recommendations are well supported by the data, and you've thought through implementation costs in a way that shows real business understanding. Harrison Manufacturing is going to be very pleased with this assessment." "Really?" Madison couldn't hide her relief and pride. "I was worried that I might be missing something important." "Not at all. In fact, your fresh perspective is valuable. Sometimes those of us who've been doing this work for years can get locked into certain ways of thinking. You're approaching these problems with creativity and common sense, which is exactly what our clients need." The remainder of Madison's first day was spent learning the company's client communication protocols and scheduling systems. She'd be presenting her Harrison Manufacturing recommendations to the client later in the week, either by video conference or in person, depending on their preference. At 5:30, Madison made her way back to the company daycare to collect Emma. She found her daughter alert and content, having apparently adapted well to the new environment and caregivers. Patricia gave her a detailed report of Emma's day, when she'd eaten, how long she'd slept, and her interactions with the staff and other children. "She's a delightful baby," Patricia said as Madison gathered Emma's things. "Very observant and responsive. I think she's going to love it here." The commute home gave Madison time to process her first day and plan for the evening ahead. She felt energized rather than exhausted, stimulated by the intellectual challenges of her new role, and confident in her ability to succeed. It was a dramatically different feeling from the bone-deep tiredness she'd experienced after shifts at the diner, where the work had been physically demanding but not particularly engaging. Back in their apartment, Madison fed Emma and then prepared a simple dinner while reviewing the training materials for the next day's assignments. She had 2 new client files to analyze and a team meeting scheduled for Wednesday morning where she'd present her Harrison Manufacturing recommendations to the entire department. As she settled into bed that night, Madison reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. Less than a week ago, she'd been homeless and hopeless, convinced that she was destined to struggle indefinitely. Tonight, she was lying in her own bed, in her own apartment, after completing her first successful day at a job that challenged and excited her. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her crib, surrounded by the security and comfort that every child deserved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Madison was no longer afraid of the future. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she was building something meaningful rather than just surviving from day to day. The rain had started again outside her bedroom window, but instead of feeling threatening, it sounded peaceful and cleansing. Madison closed her eyes and smiled, thinking about how different her life looked when viewed through the lens of possibility rather than desperation. She was ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks into her new position, Madison had developed a confidence she'd never experienced before. The Harrison Manufacturing presentation had been a resounding success, leading to a 6-month consulting contract that impressed both the client and her colleagues. Rebecca had begun assigning her increasingly complex cases, and Madison found herself thriving under the intellectual challenges. Her latest project involved Cascade Electronics, a struggling tech startup that needed to restructure their entire workforce to survive a funding shortfall. Unlike her previous assignments, which had focused on growth and expansion, this case required her to recommend difficult decisions about layoffs and departmental consolidations. Madison spread the company's organizational charts across her desk, studying the relationships between departments and identifying areas of redundancy. It was delicate work that would directly impact people's livelihoods, and she felt the weight of that responsibility acutely. Having been unemployed herself so recently, she understood the human cost of business decisions. Struggling with the cascade analysis? Kevin Park asked, stopping by her cubicle with a cup of coffee. It's just hard to recommend that people lose their jobs, Madison admitted. I keep thinking about their families, their mortgage, their kids' college funds. Kevin nodded understandingly. I felt the same way when I started. But sometimes helping a company make tough decisions early prevents them from going under completely, and everyone losing their jobs. You're not destroying livelihoods, you're trying to save as many as possible. Madison appreciated Kevin's perspective, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be a more creative solution. She spent her lunch break researching alternative restructuring strategies, looking for case studies of companies that had successfully downsized without traditional layoffs. That afternoon, she scheduled a call with Thomas Chun, Cascade Electronics CEO, to discuss her preliminary findings. Thomas was a first-generation entrepreneur whose family had immigrated from Taiwan when he was 12. His company specialized in developing accessibility technology for disabled users, work that Madison found personally meaningful. I've identified several areas where we can reduce costs, Madison began, sharing her screen to display her analysis. But instead of traditional layoffs, I'd like to propose a different approach. Thomas leaned forward, clearly interested. I'm listening. Madison outlined her alternative plan, converting some full-time positions to part-time with benefits retention, offering voluntary early retirement packages to eligible employees, and creating a temporary consulting arrangement for specialized roles that could be reduced to project-based work. The key advantage, Madison explained, is that you maintain relationships with experienced employees who could return to full-time status when your funding situation improves. You also avoid the costs associated with recruiting and training entirely new staff. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the numbers Madison had compiled. This is brilliant, he said finally. I was dreading having to fire people who've been with us since the beginning. This gives us a path forward that preserves our team culture. After the call, Madison felt a surge of professional satisfaction. Unlike anything she'd experienced, she'd not only solved the business problem, but had done so in a way that reflected her values and life experience. It was the kind of work that felt meaningful rather than just financially necessary. Rebecca appeared at her cubicle an hour later with an expression Madison couldn't quite read. Jonathan wants to see you in his office, she said. Don't worry, it's good news. Madison gathered her files and made her way to the executive floor. Wondering what could warrant a personal meeting with the CEO, Jonathan's assistant waved her directly into his office, where she found him reviewing what appeared to be client feedback forms. Madison, please sit down, Jonathan said, looking up with a smile. I've been getting some very interesting reports about your work. Madison felt her pulse quicken. I hope they're positive reports. More than positive. Thomas Chun called me personally to praise your innovative approach to their restructuring. He said you found solutions that his previous consultants hadn't even considered. Jonathan set down the papers and leaned back in his chair. But that's not the only feedback I've been receiving. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. Harrison Manufacturing has referred 3 other companies to us, specifically requesting to work with you. The team at Morrison Construction said your staffing recommendations helped them increase productivity by 30% while reducing overtime costs. Madison felt overwhelmed by the praise. I'm just trying to think about these problems from different angles. That's exactly what makes you valuable, Jonathan said. Most consultants recommend solutions based on textbook models or industry standards. You're considering the human element and finding creative alternatives that work better for everyone involved. Jonathan stood and walked to his window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. I have a proposition for you. We're opening a new division focused specifically on small business consulting, companies with fewer than 50 employees who need strategic planning, but can't afford large consulting firms. Madison's heart began racing. What kind of proposition? I want you to head the division. It would mean a significant salary increase, your own team of analysts, and the autonomy to develop your own methodologies and client relationships. Madison felt the room spinning slightly. You want me to manage a department? I've been here less than a month. I want you to build a department, Jonathan corrected. Starting from scratch, hiring your own team, establishing processes that reflect your approach to problem solving. It's a big responsibility, but I believe you're ready for it. The offer was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Madison had never managed anyone besides herself, had never been responsible for hiring decisions or budget oversight. But she could envision exactly the kind of team she'd want to create. People who understood struggle, who approached business problems with empathy and creativity. What about Emma? Madison asked. This sounds like it might require longer hours, travel to client sites. We'll work around your needs as a mother, Jonathan assured her. The beauty of consulting for small businesses is that most of them are locally based. Any travel would be day trips, and you'd have complete flexibility to schedule client meetings around Emma's needs. Madison took a deep breath, thinking about the magnitude of what Jonathan was offering. 6 months ago, she'd been homeless and convinced that she was destined to repeat her mother's failures. Now she was being offered the chance to lead her own department at a successful company. I accept, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. But I want to do this right. I'll need time to research the market, develop a business plan, and think carefully about who I want to hire. Jonathan's smile was broader than she'd ever seen it. Take all the time you need. We're looking at a January launch, which gives you 3 months to prepare. I'll have Rebecca work with you on the transition and help you understand the administrative side of running a department. That evening, Madison sat in her living room with Emma on her lap, trying to process the day's events. The apartment that had seemed like such a miraculous improvement in her circumstances now felt like just the beginning of something much larger. She was going to be a department head, a manager, a leader responsible for other people's careers and livelihoods. Her phone rang, and she was surprised to see her former foster mother's name on the caller ID. Carol Peterson had been Madison's last placement before aging out of the system, and they'd maintained sporadic contact over the years. Madison, honey, how are you doing? Carol's familiar voice brought back a flood of memories. I'm doing really well, actually, Madison said. And for the first time in her life, that statement felt completely true. How did you get my new number? I called your old number and got a message saying it was disconnected. I was worried about you, so I did some detective work and tracked you down through the phone company. Are you okay? The message mentioned something about account suspension. Madison realized she'd never updated Carol about her changed circumstances. The last time they'd spoken, she'd still been struggling to balance work and school while pregnant. A lot has happened since we last talked. I have a new job, a new apartment, and I'm actually doing better than I ever have. She found herself telling Carol the entire story, the eviction, the night in the rain meeting Jonathan, and now her promotion to department head. Carol listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of amazement or concern. "Oh, Madison," Carol said when she finished. "I always knew you had it in you to succeed, but this is beyond what I dared to hope for. You're going to help so many people through this new position." "I hope so," Madison said. "I keep thinking about all the people who are where I was just a few weeks ago, smart, capable, but stuck in circumstances that make it impossible to prove what they can do." "That's exactly why you're the right person for this job," Carol said. "You understand struggle in a way that someone who's never experienced it can't. But you also understand hope and resilience." After they hung up, Madison spent the evening researching small business consulting models and reading case studies of successful department launches. She made lists of the qualities she'd want in team members, the types of services they could offer, and the kinds of clients they should target. Emma seemed to sense her mother's excitement and was more alert than usual, tracking Madison's movements around the apartment with bright eyes. Madison found herself talking through her plans with her daughter, as if Emma were a trusted advisor rather than a 3-month-old baby. "We're going to build something special," Madison said, holding Emma up so they were face to face. "A place where people get second chances, where everyone's potential gets recognized, where hard work and creativity matter more than perfect resumes." As she prepared for bed, Madison thought about the girl who'd been sitting under that storefront overhang just a month ago. That girl had believed she was destined for failure, that the cycle of poverty and instability was unbreakable. She'd been wrong about so many things, but most of all, she'd been wrong about her own worth and potential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she began planning her department and transitioning into a leadership role. But tonight, Madison fell asleep feeling grateful for the storm that had brought Jonathan into her life and confident that the best chapters of her story were still being written. 6 months later, Seattle Community College auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as graduates filed in for the winter commencement ceremony. Madison adjusted her cap and gown, feeling surreal about finally walking across a stage she'd thought she'd never see again. In the audience, Jonathan sat with Rebecca and several other colleagues from Pacific Northwest Solutions, while Carol Peterson had driven down from Spokane to witness this milestone. Most importantly, Emma sat in the front row in her carrier, now 9 months old and alert enough to clap her tiny hands during the proceedings. The company's flexible scheduling policy had allowed Madison to complete her degree through evening and weekend classes while building her new department. "Madison Brooks," the dean announced, and she walked across the stage to receive her bachelor's degree in business administration. The applause from her section was enthusiastic enough to draw amused glances from other families, but Madison didn't care. This moment represented more than just academic achievement. It symbolized the complete transformation of her life's trajectory. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to Madison's apartment, which now bore little resemblance to the sparse space she'd moved into 6 months earlier. The walls displayed her diploma alongside photos of Emma's first milestones and awards from Pacific Northwest Solutions recognizing her innovative consulting approaches. "Tell us about the new hires," Rebecca said, bouncing Emma on her knee while Madison served coffee and homemade cake. Madison's face lit up with pride. "Maya Rodriguez starts Monday. She's a single mother with an accounting background who's been out of work for 2 years caring for her disabled son. And James Wilson is joining us from the Veterans Transition Program. He has logistics experience that'll be perfect for our supply chain optimization projects." Jonathan smiled, recognizing the pattern in Madison's hiring choices. Let me guess. They both have non-traditional backgrounds, but tremendous potential. Exactly. Maya created a complex budgeting system for her son's medical care that's more sophisticated than anything I learned in college. James managed supply logistics for a military unit of 300 people under combat conditions. They just need someone to see past their resume gaps to their actual capabilities. The Small Business Solutions division had exceeded all expectations. In its first quarter of operation, Madison's team had successfully consulted for 37 local businesses, with client satisfaction scores that were the highest in company history. More importantly, they'd developed innovative cost-saving strategies that had prevented 4 businesses from closing and helped 9 others expand their operations. The Portland expansion is confirmed for next month, Jonathan announced, raising his coffee mug in a toast. 3 other cities have requested proposals for similar programs. Madison, you've created something truly special here. As the guests began to leave, Carol Peterson lingered to help clean up. She'd become a regular presence in Madison's life, the closest thing to a grandmother that Emma would ever have. Watching them together, Madison often marveled at how family could be chosen rather than inherited. "I'm so proud of you," Carol said, wrapping Madison in a warm hug. "Not just for the degree or the job success, but for the woman you've become. You're going to impact so many lives through your work." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Madison sat at her dining table reviewing applications for 2 additional positions on her team. The stack included resumes from people with impressive credentials and others with stories that reminded her of her own struggles. She'd learned to look beyond employment gaps and unconventional career paths to identify candidates who possessed resilience, creativity, and determination. One application particularly caught her attention. Ashley Thompson was a 24-year-old former foster child who'd aged out of the system and spent 3 years working various retail jobs while trying to save money for college. Her application letter was heartfelt and articulate, describing her dream of helping other young people transition successfully to independence. Madison made a note to schedule an interview with Ashley, seeing potential in someone whose background closely mirrored her own. The cycle of opportunity that Jonathan had started with her could continue through the people she chose to mentor and hire. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a photo of a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, accompanied by a message that made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Brooks, you don't know me, but you saved my family's business last year, Thompson's Bakery in Ballard. Because of your recommendations, we were able to keep all our employees and even expand. My daughter Sarah is graduating from culinary school tonight, something we couldn't have afforded if we'd lost the bakery. Thank you for seeing solutions where others saw only problems." Madison stared at the message for a long time, feeling the profound weight of how interconnected their work had become. Her analysis had helped Thompson's Bakery restructure their operations and reduce costs without layoffs. That decision had rippled through the lives of their employees and their families, creating opportunities that might never have existed otherwise. She walked to Emma's crib and looked down at her sleeping daughter, who would grow up in a world of possibilities rather than limitations. Emma would never know the uncertainty of foster care, the fear of homelessness, or the desperation of having no options. But more than that, she would grow up understanding that everyone deserves the chance to prove their worth, regardless of their circumstances. Madison's phone rang, displaying Jonathan's name. She answered quietly, careful not to wake Emma. "I hope it's not too late to call," Jonathan said. "I wanted to discuss something with you privately, of course." "What's on your mind?" "The board has been reviewing our expansion plans, and they're extremely impressed with what you've accomplished. They want to offer you a position as Vice President of Strategic Development, overseeing all our new program initiatives." Madison Felt her breath catch. Jonathan, I don't know what to say. 6 months ago, I was just grateful to have any job at all. 6 months ago, I saw potential that you didn't even recognize in yourself. Now you're ready to help shape the entire direction of this company. The position comes with equity shares, a seat on the executive committee, and the budget to launch programs in 5 new markets. As they discussed the details of the offer, Madison found herself thinking about the night in the rain that had changed everything. She'd been so focused on immediate survival that she couldn't have imagined the life she was now living. The scared young woman seeking shelter had evolved into a business leader whose decisions affected hundreds of employees and thousands of clients. There's one condition I'd like to add to my acceptance, Madison said. Name it. I want to establish a scholarship program for aging out foster youth, funded through the company's charitable foundation. Full tuition, mentorship, and guaranteed internships for those who want them. Jonathan's pause told her he was smiling. I'd be disappointed if you hadn't asked for something like that. Consider it done. After they hung up, Madison walked to her living room window and looked out at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in the city, there were probably other young mothers facing the same desperate choices she'd confronted. Other people were convinced that their circumstances defined their limitations rather than their starting point. Tomorrow she would begin her new role and continue building programs that created opportunities for people society had written off. She would hire team members who understood struggle and channel that understanding into innovative solutions for businesses and communities that. But tonight, she was simply a young mother who defied every statistical prediction about her future. She'd broken the cycle that had trapped her own mother and countless others before her. Emma would inherit a legacy of possibility rather than poverty, of dreams achieved rather than deferred. Madison touched the window glass, remembering how the rain had felt that night when everything seemed hopeless. Now rain meant renewal and growth, the cleansing that prepared the ground for new beginnings. She'd learned that sometimes the darkest moments were actually doorways to transformation, and that one person's willingness to stop and help could change the entire course of a life. As she prepared for bed, Madison whispered a promise to her sleeping daughter. You'll grow up knowing that there's no dream too big, no goal too ambitious, and no background that can limit what you can become. And if you ever meet someone who needs a chance the way Mama did, you'll remember that everyone deserves to have their potential recognized. Outside, gentle rain began to fall on the city, but inside their warm apartment, Madison Brooks fell asleep planning how to create more opportunities for people who just needed someone to believe in their worth. The girl who'd once sought shelter from the storm had become someone who could offer shelter to others, and the cycle of hope continued. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.